Oh, yes, that was my last question. Yes, we are.
Great, okay, thanks so much. Hi, everybody, thanks for being here tonight. I'd like to call the meeting to order and start by establishing that we have a quorum, starting with Bill.
Here.
Corby.
Here.
Jen.
Here.
Nicole.
Here.
John.
Here.
Juan Carlos.
Here.
I'm here as well. We officially have a quorum. Nicole, has the meeting been properly noticed?
It has.
Thank you. And John, could you read our equity framework and our land acknowledgement?
I can. In the Verona Area School District, our mission is that each student will acquire the knowledge and skills necessary to achieve their personal goals, thrive in a diverse global society, and lead a healthy, self-fulfilling life. To meet this mission, the Verona Area School District will ensure that every individual has access to the educational, social, and emotional support they need to value and affirm their unique identities and experiences. We acknowledge that inequities and power dynamics exist in our system, such that some individuals, on the basis of their identities, face barriers to accessing the opportunities they need to experience success. In acknowledgement of such, the Verona Area School District is committed to disrupting these systems of inequity. There are currently 12 tribal nations who call Wisconsin home, with the Ho-Chunk Nation being the primary group living around Madison. No matter where you are in the state, you are on the ancestral land of a tribal nation. As we begin our day, we honor the land on which we stand.
Thank you so much. Has everyone had a chance to look at tonight's agenda? Is there a motion to adopt the agenda? Motion from Nicole. Is there a second? Second from Juan Carlos. All in favor signify with aye. Aye. Any opposed? The agenda has been officially adopted. Just kind of a heads up, just with weather. I think we have some of us out in the country, some of us a little further away, and some of us really farther away trying to get home tonight. So let's just be mindful of the time, but I also don't want to shortchange any discussion, but just keeping that safety first. So.
Can you say that louder for our presenters back there, please?
Safety first, or?
You're always.
No, it's a
Oh,
sing.
Yeah.
Oh.
Especially with Chad.
All right, so with that, we will turn it over to the superintendent's report.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is truly my honor to recognize our Board of Education for, as you know, January is Board of Education Recognition Month, and we all clearly know that it's deserving of far more than a month of recognition. So at today's meeting, and also a meeting on the 22nd, we want to, on behalf of our community, our students and families, want to give sincere appreciation for all your work as a collective body. And I'm going to be reading some things to you that I'm gonna do not a very good teacher move and ask you to pause and use your hands for something, and then come out and let me explain what you have in your hand once you have it. So you might want to eye the box up and see how quickly you can get that bow off, because it would take me a little bit more, but let me get to that part. Okay. All right. So, as we know, January is the Board of Recognition Month, and a time to honor and recognize the work of our Board of Education members. Verona Area School District is fortunate to have 7 dedicated, caring, compassionate individuals who represent, lead, and serve the community. The board takes pride in and commits to acting in the community's best interest and ensuring that all board and district action remain consistent with law and board policies. This group of 7 works collectively to ensure that each student will acquire the knowledge and skills necessary to achieve their personal goals and thrive in a diverse global society. Lead a healthy, self-fulfilling life, and lead a healthy, self-fulfilling life. In honor of your service and expertise, we'd like to publicly recognize you with a certificate, which you see in front of you, and a small gift of Verona and a miniature cake. So if I can ask you to open your box, please.
Yeah, here, maybe we'll have, Jen, can you do like an example one, maybe?
It's actually not that bad.
We had a little side bit about how long the bowl was going to take to come up, so we were trying to. Yeah, there it is. All right. All right, no worries.
Oh, cool. This is the Verona.
Oh, that's cool.
All right, if each of our board members want your boxes open, and Brother White, if you doing okay? You just rip it, that's okay.
was struggling.
It's okay.
Oh, there's a snake.
Oh, that's just very cool.
There it is. All right. If I could give a quick presentation of the Hilo-Rama. The Hilo-Rama is known in English as string art. This art form emerged at the end of the 19th century as a way to make the theory of mathematics, Jen, more understandable to children by forming curves out of straight lines. It became a popular craft activity in the late 1960s through kits and books. These were especially made for you, our Board of Education members, by Mary Manzano. She is a parent of Verona Area School District alumnus and current employee, Karen Barrueta. And thank you, if hopefully you're watching at home, and thank you so much for doing this work. The miniature cakes were made by our Verona Area School District culinary students in Miss Megan Wynn's classes. These aspiring bakers are happy to bring the sweetness of our scholars to you. And on behalf of all of us, our sincere gratitude for all that you do and for your willingness to serve as the Board of Education. Thank you very much to the board.
Thank you, that is incredibly
So
sweet.
nice,
Impressive.
The cake is heavy.
Deliciousness.
There's a lot of intense flavor in there.
So if we're stuck in our cars home tonight,
It's
this cake
I'm so jealous.
will survive.
It's okay.
It's car cakey.
It's okay to dig into it.
Park eating, just so there's no sharing required once we get home.
When we wrap up today's board meeting, if I could quickly have the board come together with your plaques and your art for a quick group photo that Marcy will take in front of either one of the banners or a space where we can get everybody before we head out for the night, please. All right,
Thank you.
thank you. All right. Before we bring our first two speakers up to talk about budget enrollment and staffing update, you can go ahead and start making your way up, Chad and Rochelle and Pete. I want to, and I don't want to dampen the mood, but I just want to say in the spirit of education and just the humanistic passion that we have for our students and families, not only in the Verona Area School District, but across Dane County. We want to send our sincere thoughts and condolences and blessings to the Sun Prairie Area School District for the tragedy that inspired us. Our most special gift, which is our children. You know, you think about it from education standpoint, we're most parents in some way, family fortune, and just really want to sincerely provide any type of we can support, but just if they can hear another organization provide just support for what they are enduring and what each person, anyone that has a heart is enduring, and knowing that we lost some very, very valuable lives in our great Dane County community. So on behalf of the Verona School District, I just wanted to send that out. I talked to their superintendent today and their other leaders, but to express that on behalf of our Board of Education and on behalf of our district as a whole. So I just wanted to take that moment to put that into the space for healing in the Sun Prairie Area School District. All right, so with that, I want to bring us to a presentation of. Comments, right?
No, we're voting, yeah, we'll do.
Regular, okay. On our 2024-25 budget, enrollment and staffing update. And while enrollment is listed there, this will kind of be some of the thought that goes into the presentation on the 22nd, which is open enrollment. But right now, this is baseline enrollment. Our allocation projections based off our baseline enrollment and the budget that supports our student outcomes as such, okay? All right, so I'll turn it over to our team. Thanks for being here tonight.
Happy Monday, board. And like to echo what Dr. C said on your service and Board of Education month. Behind the scenes, you don't know how often we are thankful for getting to work with the 7 of you. So good to see you all tonight. We will do what we can to be brief and concise. To Dr. Clary's point, we have turned the page to 2024, and it's already time to take a look at the 24-25 budget, and the timing is perfect. This is just in line with what we did last year in terms of this being the evening we take a first look at how the budget started to shake out all the way into October, and we take a look at OE5, which is in line just with that, making sure that we are planful in terms of the numbers we put into budget assumptions. We look back, we look at the current year, and we look forward. All that will take place this evening, and the enrollment piece is great timing as we're going to have discussions around open enrollment at our next board meeting. So it's good to see everybody, and we will get going here. So we're going to first get into a brief look at where we're seeing the 24-25 budget. And again, now that the board's been together a couple of years here, we will have the next 5 or 6 months to continue to refine this before we pass the preliminary budget. That's our first crack at it. And then we get to the annual meeting, and then we pass the final budget late in October. The nice thing about this budget, really for the first time, we don't have a referendum hanging in the balance, at least in our administration, and we don't have a state budget hanging in the balance. Both those things happened the previous 2 years. A lot of what we have going into this budget is known to us, and we will be able to make some earlier decisions than we've made in the past. With that being said, this is the time with this budget to do all kinds of OE5 work in terms of what the next 4 or 5 years might look like, in terms of where our budget may be going, if many of the assumptions hold true in terms of what we see coming in years to follow this budget. Pete and I wanted to start where we started with the board last year, and again, there are more knowns in this budget than we've had in the past. Some of these are guesses, others are known factors that we've built into our 5-year summary. So as we work our way down this list, these are important numbers. These are really the big movers in terms of, and drivers in terms of where that 24-25 budget will end up. For the time being, we are building 50 FTE. That's a full-time equivalent of an enrolled student into this budget. And there are a few factors that go into that. How many new students that we kind of refer to as butts in seats we will have that are resident students of ours. And then open enrollment does play a role in terms of how this all shakes out in the end. Primarily for us, open enrolling out, that we don't get to count initially as students in seat, actually count into our FTE formula. So you're going to see some numbers diverge a little bit this evening, where we're predicting 29 or 30 extra students in seats this upcoming year, but our FTE count's a little bit higher. That's because we do have some students that elect to go to other school districts that we get to count when we send those to DPI. We have increased our guess around what we see happening with property value. And as a reminder, this is an important number for us as a school district to continue to try to manage property taxes. That if we end up increasing our levy a given amount, increased property value either from new construction or increased property value for existing homes or property taxpayers. It's an important number when we start to talk about managing debt and at the same time managing property taxes. We know this time that we'll have a $325 increase on our per pupil revenue limit. Our categorical aid will not change because we're on the second year of biennial budget. Pete is predicting a small increase for us when it comes to state aid. And the primary reason for that is we are a growing school district. 75 or 80% of the school districts in the state are shrinking, and one of the factors that goes into the aid calculation is how many students we have. The other pieces are actually, the other parts of our budget actually count against us in the aid formula quite significantly. We are a property-rich school district, and we spend more per pupil than the average school district. Those two things hurt us in the aid formula, but what Pete and I have certainly found over the last few years, the fact that we're picking up students has helped us with the aid, which in turn offsets local property tax. For the time being, we are building in to the numbers we're going to share with you today, a CPI increase for our staff, and that is yet to be determined. We still have to get in, go all the way through the collective bargaining process. We're certainly interested in feedback from the board this evening, if you choose to give us some. One other important thing on that line is we are through our final year with this budget, with getting all the staff caught up with compression. It seems like that has been happening for a few years and it has. I think we're at least 3 years into that.
24, 25 will be the fifth year.
Yeah, which is a good thing. And was one of the things that we were able to build into the $19 million recurring revenue authority related to our operating referendum. So that's the last year. That's why that number's bigger. But then that's in our budget in perpetuity, which is a good thing. Healthcare is going to go up 6.9. We got a cap on that. Rochelle just met with GHC again last week. We had a bigger meeting the previous week. We built in utilities to go up 5% and all other things at 3%, so it's below inflation. But again, those are things that we can kind of catch in our budget and we build in efficiencies on an annual basis. That's probably one of the most important slides of our budget update. Does the board have any questions around budget assumptions we're building into the next 5 years, for sure next year? Cool.
Can you talk me through why you would put a number in the all other objects that you already think is too low with CPI? Is that just like how the budget balanced out? That's kind of what was left over?
Yeah, that has kind of been our standard operating procedure on an annual basis. We've made some modest adjustments on an annual basis. So 3 years ago, when we decided that we no longer were going to kind of fee and charge our families to death upon registration and field trips and book fees and everything else, we made a fairly big move when it came to local building allocation for their budget. And Pete pretty much on a monthly basis continues to monitor those budget numbers. But by and large, everything else, and it isn't a lot, there's not a lot left once you get through staffing, salary, benefits, and all the others that we're feeling like we're in a good spot as far as our budget goes. So we did not want to, especially last year, we didn't want to build in an 8% CPI increase into all expenses district-wide, and it kind of just continues to have us more than anything tighten our belt on an annual basis, and then tweak the budget if we're feeling all of a sudden we're bumping into expenditures kind of outpacing what we have for revenue. And you'll see, I think, why, in my opinion, that's kind of best practice to continue to, on the stuff we don't, the big bucket items are the things that we really need to make decisions around on an annual basis, and then kind of pick at the edges on all the other stuff on an annual basis. 80% of our budget goes into salary and benefits on an annual basis. And then when you take utilities and transportation off the top, there's not a ton left in our budget, quite honestly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Question, Chad.
Yeah.
The 6.9% with health, is that saying premiums increasing 6.9 or, okay.
That is all in. So Pete moved his healthcare and Benny's line 6.9%, and that is in line with a 2-year agreement, 3-year agreement we had with GHC that I think we locked in, and we had like a 4%, and now we're at a 6.9%. We met with them last week. It's an open books arrangement on healthcare. We were running pretty good as far as our loss ratios, and we're continuing to work with GHC to make sure that we are getting the fairest third year of that agreement possible, and they're well aware of the fact that we have options following this upcoming budget as far as what we want to do with healthcare. But that was the max end on their cap. We've watched what's happened with other school districts that had their loss ratios go kind of through the roof, and we're left scrambling for healthcare. So we feel good about the fact that it looks like GHC is it for this upcoming year when we turn the budget over, but we will be at 6.9%.
Real quick, the 4.12 is that CPI estimate?
That is a CPI estimate at this point.
When is that finalized? Last year was until.
Next week, isn't it?
No, yeah,
Is
so,
that final?
our budget, we have to use the January to January CPI. And my guess would be we would have that number probably within the next week or two. So we'll know it for sure. They're, part of a statewide organization known as WASBO tracks this number very closely. Pete's counterpart in Kettle Moraine is a CPI savant. Similar to what Pete does with state aid estimates, and sends out a statewide update on a monthly basis when the monthly inflation number comes out. And we're thinking between 4.1 and 4.2 at this point. The last number we had was 4.12. Any other questions on the slide? Those are all good questions. Okay. The rest of these we'll go through in relative brief order, but I think there's some interesting things we want to point out before. In 24-25, there's a few big changes that Pete also has to build into the upcoming budget. I bracketed as a reminder, we are continuing to levy on an annual basis $1 million for us to maintain our facilities. I would encourage the board that we continue to do that in terms of best practice. That is a number on occasion that school districts can start to chase when budgets get tight, start to pull away from the general maintenance budget when it comes to maintaining your facilities. And that is essentially a one-time money grab. If we decided let's pull $500,000 out of there for salary, benefits, and people, that is something that comes home to roost down the road if you're not taking care of roofs and parking lots and all of the injury prevented measures we can do when it comes to maintaining our facilities. Next year is our last year that we would have any access to ESSER funds. We have managed that well. It's really been used with a shell game for prepayment and debt and tax relief. But next year we don't have any ESSER, and we've got that land purchase from 60 acres that now is the opposite of a negative in Pete's budget world that really comes back on the books because of the one-time expense year one. Salary scenarios, just to give the board an idea of the investment that's going on with salaries and related increases to CPI. You're very familiar with this slide. We looked at this a lot, all the way up to 8% last year. So as we work our way through that, that second column from the right is what we have to build in as an added expenditure for salary. Pete built in a step, already built in compression, and then really the change, the variable that changes that number on the right is the percentage increase above the base there. But just to keep an eye on that. Folks should be very familiar with this slide. This was a kind of the cornerstone to our $19 million referendum. And it's really the final big idea that Pete and I want you to take away this evening in terms of our first look at the budget. So that gray column, the 2024 budget, that's this year. And as we work our way down to that first red box, you can see Pete has outlined that $14.5 million of the 19 million we've essentially built into our budget with ongoing expenses, all the stuff that we're going to talk about later, primarily keeping up with inflation, and that's this year. Next year, as we look to 24-25, you can see that we now have 18, almost 0.2 million of the 19 million that we've used for recurring expenses. If all of those budget assumptions hold that I just kind of introduced to the board at the beginning, meaning the next year over, you can see that number is balanced. We've gone through all of the $19 million of added revenue authority. And if you work your way to the bottom right corner of the box we put in red, next year, if all of those assumptions hold true, that Pete's built into this 5-year model, we would have the potential of a budget deficit. I do want to tell the board that some of the numbers we've built in here are conservative. You can see instead of $325 per pupil, we dialed that back to $200 per pupil. Who knows what happens with the next state budget? There's a chance Tony Evers' red pen holds where like the next 400 years it's $325. I wouldn't hold my breath. But in some regards, some might say this is actually an optimistic look at what we might get out of the next state budget. But who knows, we might get another round of 300 plus. But for the time being, if those hold, and we've got inflation built into that, we've got property values built into that. Not on the debt side, but on the paying people side, we have the potential of a couple $1 million budget gap to fill.
Can you remind me why the used amount of Fund 10 goes down from this year to next year? It says 15 million, Fund 10 use referendum this year, and then budget next year, somehow we want to spend 500,000 less.
Walk me to where you're at on.
If you look at Fund 10 use of referendum, the left number to the red box, it's somehow higher than that 14. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding that. Right, so why does it go up and then back down? It goes 15 million, then 14.5. Like negative, yeah, maybe it's
That had to do, I'm guessing, with our $1.6 million property purchase that came out of one kind of fund.
and it didn't decrement by that same 1.6
And we didn't
because
have-
we like amortized.
We did not
it.
have it in the, we did not have it in the.
Oh, in the budget, so we actually, okay, gotcha.
So if that would not have existed, we would have used the Fund 10 towards, really what we're doing, most of the additional money, we are putting towards, the prepayment of debt. That's what we've done for the last 3 years. So Pete, that's my guess on the outlier. We buried a $1.6 million expense into this year's budget because of land purchase and the budget commitment that we made. Other questions? Okay. So I think the general theme for this budget, and I think it's going to pair with what we're going to, I think, initially share with our principals on the board, is that this is a year to do what we can to be deliberate and incredibly thoughtful around any added expenditures to this budget. We have money this year. Any difficult decisions we make this year that we decide we're not adding that to this year's budget makes next year's budget all the better. Where we're looking at a $2 million deficit if the state budget doesn't come in, incredibly rosy. So that's kind of the theme for this year. We don't see adding a ton of FTE to the district after all of the FTE we added the previous year. And if inflation gets in check even a little bit more, this could start to trend in a better direction for that fiscal year 26 budget. But for the time being, making really wise budget decisions this year, so the following year is a little less painful. Any other questions? Okay. We're going to keep Pete here just in case something pops up, especially if Pete was involved heavily with the enrollment work. I'm going to do what I can to kick off enrollment, and then we're certainly interested in answering any questions the board might have. So Rochelle, I'll take this one and we kind of hand it over to you over to staffing. So we decided to pair staffing and enrollment. Last year, we made a pretty significant budget investment in terms of added FTE in line with results policies. And that you'll see some of that highlighted in evidence and OE 5 tonight. This year, as we work our way into any budget additions around FTE, it's going to be important, again, that those are done in line with the results policy, and that primarily is student need, and that's an equity-based budget, putting added resources around the students that need them, and enrollment. So we certainly have this time of year, have an eye on what we think will happen with enrollment when we finally get to next September. Any additions would have to fall in line with regulations and laws. We want to make sure we continue to have a common understanding in terms of common understanding with our union and our staff in terms of where we end up with the projections that I shared with you. We'll work closely with VA, and VESPA the second half of the year so they understand where our budget will land. We believe we'll have some conversations around workload grid and potentially taking a look at what has been handbook language around hard to serve students and the additional pay that goes along with that. And then anything that we do in terms of staffing has to fall in line with what we before. My clicker died. I'm gonna go manual. Well, it had something to do with that little word that we got. The U, click in. Next. Perfect, thanks, Lori. So, in line with what we put on that last slide, it's going to be important for us to make some staffing decisions around student enrollment. And we pulled a screenshot of what we'll be sharing with principals here in a couple of weeks. These are big numbers for principals this time of year. They're very interested in our best guess in terms of the number of students they're going to have in each section, because they know a lot of what happens with the big mega posting that we have in the spring will be in line with how many students we're guessing they'll have the following year. But we continue to remind our principals that it's important that that they know we will make summertime adjustments as necessary if registration numbers come in one way or another. We wanted to share with the board just a screenshot on the bottom of the method Craig and Pete, for the most part, used to kind of have us make our best guess with how many students we're going to have in each section across each school. And we'll share that chart with the board here on the next slide. And you can see here, really, Pete and Craig figured out with a whole bunch of work, and credit to the both of you for the month of work you put into this. They really took a look at what we have for, by example, the number of 8th graders we've got in our school district. Took Savannah, took Core, took Badger, add them up, slide them to 9th grade, and then looked at historic numbers in terms of how many extra students that were not accounted for in the roll ahead 8 to 9 on an average basis, and built in a ratio. And this is just the way our district has acted historically. And the 8th to 9th grade example is a very good example where you may have some students coming out of parochial school that only went to 8th grade, and we pick up 9th graders that we weren't counting on. And that happens. It happens in 5 to 6, and it happens just on an annual basis with students moving into our district. So we took a screenshot here of kind of those ratios that Pete and Craig were building into 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. You roll ahead an entire class, and then you build in a ratio in terms of the extra students that you might pick up. Next slide, I think this is the one the board might be most interested in. So this is where we are predicting we will be, and this is enrollment. So this is students in seats for next year. This is our best guess in January, but will be some baseline numbers for us to figure out allocation for the spring. You can see from 23, 24 to 24, 25, we're predicting somewhere in the ballpark of 30 extra students that we would be educating. This does dovetail into the January, 20th? When's the next board meeting?
It's like this.
22nd board meeting. We did include rolling ahead all of our open enrollment students, in particular the 11 students we got from 5th to 6th grade in these numbers. Just so you know, because the board has not acted on that yet. So we did include the additional 11 students that would stay with us if we elected to keep them via open enrollment. Sharon, question?
I just don't know the term rolling ahead.
Roll ahead is this. So if we take a look at, let's just take a look at the far upper left-hand corner. So Country View Elementary this year has 47 kindergartners. Next year, if you go over to 24-25, that class rolls forward, and you can see the ratio Pete and Craig built into that is that on average, over the last few years, that class would have picked up an extra student. So that's why the kindergartens went from 47 to 48 first graders in Country View, rolling the class ahead.
I understand. I had a question about the way you use your context. I can clear that up later.
Okay. Did my scenario make sense in terms of what I did?
Yeah.
So that's our best guess in terms of enrollment for next year. Open enrollment is a factor. It would be a factor in what we do with kindergarten primarily, and what we do from the 5th to 6th grade transition.
Can you clarify the enrollment use of the students?
Yeah, so we are, we're required by open enrollment law to adhere to what we get in administrative rules. And our administrative rule lets our district, in the end, the board, make a decision on, at one point in our on kind of the K-12 continuum from 5th to 6th grade, how many slots we want to retain for students. Currently, we have 11 open enrolled 5th grade students. And the board can allocate anywhere from 0 to an infinite number of 6th grade slots for next year. Last year, we made the recommendation to carry no additional 6th graders forward because our middle schools are so full.
Students that don't live in this district.
That is exactly right.
That are going to go from elementary to middle school.
Correct.
Due to success aided, so we want to continue education in the district.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yep.
Because I know there are a lot of questions about that, so I want to make sure that part was clear.
Yep. Yep, so that's, primarily those would be, because we are a growing school district with, and we've worked on this with OE 12, we're gonna run out of space here over the next 3 or 4 years. We can pretty much predict that Dr. Hawkins and her team will not bring recommendations to the board that would drastically increase the number of open enrollment slots any more than the students we already have, which we're required to hold on to. And really, the only 2 places that we can make decisions on would be incoming kindergartners and the 6th grade class. Those are the 2 spots the board is going to have some discussion on.
Thank you.
How do these projected 28 new students next year track when you put it through the calculation for FTE compared to the 50 FTE in the budget predictions for next year? And I don't need an exact, but is it in line with?
It is in line. And you don't need the exact, I think, a couple of years, it's 51.8.
Okay. Look at that, even more.
Wow, exactly.
Good question. Anything else on
I just
enrollment?
want to make, because I don't want it to cause any confusion for our presentation on the 22nd. So in terms of open enrollment, yes, those are the 2 choices that the board would make on the 22nd. But there is a category of students that are called tuition waivers as well, where you have to make a decision based if you would allow students that are currently here on a tuition waiver, especially as they're late, say 11th graders, to make a determination of would you open up 12th grade slots for those students that are on a tuition waiver to apply and potentially remain in the Verona Area School District.
Are those the ones we did last year?
Yes.
Those are the ones
That's in addition to that.
Yes.
So those would be new slots. Again, we have the legal right, and many districts do, to open enrollment wide open, that anyone who applies comes in. We don't do that because we're a growing school district and we have limited slots. But Dr. Clary's example is correct, that we would have the right to open up a dozen slots for seniors if we wanted, if we do have students on tuition waiver. So that's another layer of the discussion that will occur at the next board meeting. Okay.
Yeah, and so as and Jazz doing a phenomenal job of keeping this, we have this terrible thing in education lingo where things are so closely aligned. So there's enrollment, open enrollment, and then tuition waivers within which isn't, they would have to become an open enrolled student if we allowed it to tuition waiver. So we have to be, kind of be very careful about how we're talking about all three of those. So the beginning of the presentation is purely about enrollment projections for students that live within the boundaries of the Verona Area School District. To Chad's point, the number did include that fifth grade class that's currently here, but are on open enrollment. So that has to be that would be a consideration. So that moves into the world of open enrollment for the 22nd conversation, and then tuition waiver would also fall into that category of discussion for the board on the 22nd.
And is lockstep with the conversation around if we ended up in a spot that we were up 100 students with students in seats, all of a sudden class sizes start to go up, and we're starting to have conversations around the need to add additional FTE. The 30 students we're expecting next year spread out around all of our schools. This is a year that potentially, after all of the hiring we did last year as kind of catch up, that we can have a little tighter budget this year around new hires. That's the biggest thing. Yeah. We've got the slide that we'll go through rather quickly that the board has seen before, but the catch up year, we did a large investment, equity-based investment into staffing in terms of spots that we believe in line with the results policy, needed extra attention. All right, next slide, Lori. Rochelle, this is where I pass the baton to you, and the board has seen this before, but I'll turn it over to you for where we're going with staffing.
Thank you. So just like Chad was saying, kind of rolling ourselves forward to this upcoming school year, knowing that our investments in staffing have already been given this last year. You can see the 30 FTE that we invested, the salary history that is growing exponentially. We've landed to be the top tier one of the highest salaries in the county. Our benefits are by far amazing. Our turnover is low. Everything that we shared with OE4 a few months ago really are coming to fruition because of the investments. But that also means, and we talked about this, do we pay people more or pay more people? And I think we're at that spot where we really have to double down on that, knowing that our future budget years, very, very soon, we're going to be looking at some numbers. Next slide. So January is our kickoff month on where we start working with principals on our staffing plans for this upcoming school year. And we were going to kick it off on Wednesday, but we've got this big snowstorm coming, so we're kicking it off in a couple of weeks from now. But we will be sharing with our principals a lot of the information that we shared tonight. And we will be asking them to do some self-reflection with themselves, their directors, and their SBLT on their teachers, their classroom teachers, their non-classroom teachers, and what the student outcomes are based on how they're utilizing those folks in their buildings. And we will work with them between January and February to really build out what that staffing plan is going to look like next year so that we have the best outcomes for kiddos. And so step 2, directors and principals are going to work through that information. Step 3 is our next big date. At the end of February, our principals are going to present and share how they see their staffing plans being implemented next year with our central office leadership team. That then sets us up to see what types of staffing shifts we need to make within our budget, or if we have to do FTE investments. And those will then come back to Dr. Clarity, Chad, and Dr. Hawkins for us to be able to then roll out our mega post in March. And we want to do that in March because we know every other school district is doing it in the exact same time, and we want to make sure we get the best. So this is kind of our life cycle that we go through and kind of work through throughout the next couple of months. Next slide. The piece that I want to ground ourselves in and what our principals ground themselves in are some of our staffing commitments. So we talked a little bit about class sizes. This is driven by the handbook. So our handbook says a minimum of 15 to 25 kids for elementary. And we know we go over sometimes and we know we go under sometimes, but those are our parameters that we work through. For secondary, it's 15 to 30. We also do a really good job and we're committed to monitoring our enrollment. So what you saw for that snapshot today is something that we start looking at even more once we figure out our charter enrollments, what TWE starts to look like. And by June and July, we're actually looking at a weekly basis what actual enrollment is going to look like next year with kids enrolling in the district and all of those moving pieces. And at that time, we start looking at actual FTE moves. If we see a bubble grade coming in, this happened at Stewart Prairie this year. Kindergarten just exploded in a really good way. And we made the decision at the end of, well, it was middle of August to move another FTE to cover. So we're very nimble in that, knowing that we're actually watching those kiddo numbers throughout. Next slide, please. So we kind of talked a little bit about what that timeline is. The data review starts at the end of this month. We're going to move that date. Those staffing leadership moves are in February. Our mega post is in March. Lots of principals actually feel fairly comfortable with steps 1 through 3. What gets them a little more excited and nervous is when we start talking about stipends. And so that's a piece that we do a lot of work over the summer with to make sure our stipends are set up correctly. And again, we just continually monitor student enrollment, class sizes, and all of those things to make sure that we're doing what's right at the moment. Next slide. The piece that I just want to land ourselves in as we wrap up staffing are those commitments that we made during the and those are up here on the slide deck. And those are pieces that as we monitor our enrollment, monitor resignations and retirements, that we continue to hold ourselves accountable for. So we talk about staff collaboration. We live and breathe that every day. Desirable staff to student ratios. That's a part of when we look at class sizes and enrollments, how we're making sure we're balancing those. Investments in our multilingual program. Ensuring that we recruit and retain our highly qualified. And to ensure at the end of the day, what we're doing is providing rich programs and specialized services for our girls. So that's the big picture of how we make all of those decisions that I just talked about. With that, last slide, does anyone have any questions?
Maybe not really a question, but a clarification. So, oh, my brain just went that direction. Where did it go? So I heard you say SBLT, so I'm thinking about like classroom level teacher voice and how that process is all the way through all these things that you're talking about. So SBLTs are sort of the representation at the site level, but those folks are taking insights from other staff in the building, right? In terms of classroom teacher and other educator perspectives in each building, and that's traveling through.
Yes.
And then do you have any defined touch points with VAEA or VESPA along this way? Is that sort of just ongoing? Are there clear times when you're touching base with those groups as well?
Absolutely. So at this point, it's more of the weekly meetings that I've got with our VF representative. We start talking about when we see big shifts. Once we get to the point where principals are starting to talk about actual moves, then it is those conversations with VAEA and VESPA to say, here's what we think is going to happen. Let's talk through it to make sure everyone's on the same page and make sure we're getting the right pieces at the table. We learned there was a miss with that a couple of days ago. So we are on top of that now. And it is those relationships that we built, the collaborative meetings that we got, and those common touch points that I should have.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right, on to OE5. Board, we good to work our way through this? So I had several conversations with Dr. Clarity on where we are and the progress we've made relative to OE5. And I think really a couple of keystone documents that, at least in my opinion, we've continued to make progress with in our school district is in particular our budget book. Kind of from V1 to where we're at right now. And much of the work that ends up being built into that budget book actually comes through as evidence in OE5. And Dr. Clarity, you reminded me today, our first really annual report on academic results in line with everything that's built into our budget book. Also certainly pairs with the conversation we just had with Rochelle, all kind of dovetails its way through OE5 and the financial planning that we did. Much of what we shared initially tonight around 5-year projections will be one of multiple pieces of evidence we will use for OE5 next year. And it, in my opinion, is best practice. It's good for the board and the community to know that we're not perfect in terms of the crystal ball, but we're having a multi-year approach to making sure that we're keeping an eye on the budget. Where, as a good example, we have it in our budget this year to add 15 people to the budget. If we did look at the budgets following, you can have 1 year of really fun spending, and then years down the road, you've got really tough budgets because you didn't do the right work.
Yeah, Chad, thanks for looking it up. I just wanted for our, just the easier reading for the board. So in our conversations, we wanted to do a better job of making it stand out when something was noticed in a prior progress monitoring report, to be very explicit about where it was listed and where that correction was made. And so under this one, you'll see is leadership adjustments from 2023 monitoring report to 24 monitoring report that we try to we'll just put a link with new evidence. So you clearly know that new piece of evidence supported where we may have saw a gap in a previous monitoring report. So as we're reading those executive summaries, we'll always try to have that section marked for you.
Thank you, Dr. Clarity. Sorry, next slide. So in general, OE5 is intended to make sure we have a multi-year financial plan that's directly related to results policies and results priorities in our OEs and avoids long-term fiscal jeopardy for the school district. Next slide, Lori. We did some of that this evening. So 5.1, the superintendent will develop a budget that's in summary format, understandable, presented in a manner that allows the board to understand the relationship with the budget, results policies, and operational expectations. I believe much of what we even shared this evening in terms of where we will be highlighting potential spends in this upcoming budget and where we put resources last year in line with the results policies did happen. So we believe we are in compliance with all three of those indicators that we did present the board with summarized budgets in individual form. The budget definitely contained high-level summaries that we outlined, and the board did adopt the budget this time with a 7-0 vote, with a majority vote when we passed it. Next slide. 2 is pretty simple. We'll develop a budget that credibly describes where the money is coming from and what we expect to spend, revenues and expenditures. So adopting the prior year budget was done in compliance with really general auditing practices 65.9. Next slide. Superintendent's budget shows the amount spent in each category completely in the fiscal year, and that the amount budgeted in each fiscal year and the amount budgeted for next fiscal year. So that's a 3-year budget. Pete and I, that is, I think, kind of the standard DPI report that we build in to our budget, right, Pete?
Yeah, and the 3-year budget is what we put into the budget book. So that's the 6590 where it has a prior year of actual data and then the current year that was just ended along with the upcoming budget. So that's the one chances are putting.
Yeah, essentially that is kind of the cookie cutter what ends up in our budget book every year, and then we also continue to do 5-year modeling. Next slide. The budget discloses budget planning assumptions. That was our lead slide tonight with us building assumptions into next year's budget. that we share with the board, take feedback on, and make adjustments. Even the conversation, that we've had recently, I've had with Joe, even around what to do with property value in upcoming years. That you can be overzealous with that, and all of a sudden you have to make that kind of pull back as you get yourself towards October. But, we had 3% built into the previous two. We made an adjustment to go to 5%. That's an example of continuing to kind of refine what we've got for assumptions. Next slide, Lori. Superintendent will develop a budget that reflects anticipated changes in employee compensation, inflation, step increases, performance increases, and benefits. And that certainly was even on display tonight when we went through a 5-year budget. We make estimates in terms of what's going to happen with compensation and inflation, and those are two of the biggest drivers that end up really dictating what happens with the following budget. Next slide. Superintendent will develop a budget that includes such amounts as the board determines to be necessary for its own governing function. And there really we included as evidence the board's budget. But I also know Dr. Clarity also uses some of his discretionary budget to continue to make sure the board has what it needs to govern itself and its single CEO on an annual basis. Next slide. Superintendent may not develop a budget that really is unbalanced. So we'll have an annual budget that ensures long-range financial stability, and the example I gave tonight would be a spending spree this year without looking at the following year. Next slide. That we will develop a budget where our year-end fund balance is no less or essentially exceeds 10%. Pete shared some good news with me this week that all of the work we did around short-term borrowing, at least for the next quarter, we don't believe we're going to need to do any short-term borrowing this year. So that open line of credit is still an insurance policy to make sure Pete gets his $8 sleep every night. But at least in the short term, the January payroll, which Pete thought would be a low point on cash, we're not going to.
Still a low point, but not as low as I thought.
Which is really good news. I think that, I don't know the history, but my guess would be it's been potentially decades since this school district didn't have to do short-term borrowing to get itself to the school year, which is really great.
You're usually slow.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
I'm so proud of you in my head.
I'm still working with the summer though.
Okay, softly slow.
Saving money.
So, but it's a really good thing.
And still having a big savings.
We are available for any questions related to OE5, but I do believe this is one of our tighter bodies of work in the world of business and finance. And certainly been we helped build this over the last couple of years with board feedback and all the work we've done. The referendum really made us get good at this.
Maybe just a clarification for the sake of the community with the Fund 10 balance, because I know some of that came up in discussion with property taxes and just curious wonderings about kind of the state of the district. If you could even just add a little more context to average what is, I mean, it says in that we recommend that it's never less than 10%. And when you see 30%, are we like hoarding cash? I mean, just giving a little context again to maybe fund balance and the importance of having the balance we have and that we're not, hoarding money and taking more from the community.
For sure. I've got a few thoughts on that. First, in our budget book this year, we actually gave a comparative summary of where our district is compared to our Dane County peers. And we're essentially middle of the road. There are districts that are pushing 50% in Dane County. We, as a board, and this is your budget, made the decision to do what we had to get out of the business of short-term borrowing. And there are annual benefits for us to actually have some cash on hand when interest rates are as high as they are right now. We're actually spinning off some revenue when it comes to investing the money that we've got. So that's one. Two, we have to continue to remember that anytime that we dip into fund balance, and essentially that is in the form of an unbalanced budget, if you don't do it with one-time expenditures like planning, and you do it with people or benefits, you are tanking your budget. So you're only, the second you put those existing expenses that are recurring into your budget and fund with fund balance, or really our savings account, we're on a kind of a one-way street to either having to make massive cuts in our district or heading back around. That's all there is to it. I guess the third thing is I continue to reiterate how important it is to have cash on hand to do things like buy the Lacey Road property when we wanted to do it. If we did not have that, there's a chance that that whole thing would have fallen through and we would have had to wait to the next time we could have put it on the ballot for referendum. I think all those things are all in the mix when it comes to fund balance. I would not recommend to the board we ever get back to anywhere close to 10%, where you're kind of teetering on that on an annual basis. We're kind of jeopardizing anything from bond rating all the way through having access to one-time cash. When needed.
Just to maybe ask that a different way, and I'm gonna test Pete here. If we did have an only down to that 10% minimum fund balance, how much would we have had to borrow in January approximately?
I don't know that one off the top of my head.
Many millions.
Yes. Yeah, because if we were at about 20% a year ago, and we were borrowing 9 million, and now we're at 30.
And
Was
with,
it 18 million?
with that level of borrowing, we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest, maybe.
18 million without a down payment.
So in terms of what we're saving the district, that's what we're saving the district. Just some short-term borrowing.
Yeah, for me, I like to think about it as you're saving in the household, your household, right? You want emergency savings. So that you want to constantly borrow at a high interest rate, right? So if you have cash on hand for savings, emergency savings, or opportunities, that makes more sense, especially in an interest rate environment, to have that cash on hand versus pay interest rate that's unique to do it. That's how you have this financial stewardship. I like to just how I do my personal finances, definitely cash on hand as a buffer. Very good. You're not moving on one end just to look a better over there.
Right, and the big piece is you don't want to get in the habit of the board passing unbalanced budget, where expenditures are outpacing revenue, and then you're dipping into that savings account. There's only so long that can last. Good question.
Thanks.
Other questions on OE5? Dr. Clarity, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. So at this time, we'll officially close OE5 and ultimately the superintendent's report and turn it back to our board president for board action.
Okay, so with that, is there a motion to accept OE5 as presented? There's a motion from Joe. Is there a second? Second from Nicole. Any questions from the board?
I don't have a question, just a comment. Because I don't think we can overstate how good a job this district is doing at managing this. The financial planning part of our OEs, in terms of balancing very difficult competing interests that often pull against each other, but we've been able to do just what we talked about, avoid that short-term borrowing. At the same time, we're making heavy investments in prepayment on debt. At the same time, we're dropping mill rates at pretty historic levels. At the same time, we're giving historic increases in staff compensation. So, I mean, to be able to balance all of those as successfully as this administration's been able to do is really, it can't be overstated. And that's on the planning part, and then on the openness, like the degree to which we get everything just presented out to us in public session and board meetings. I think it's the model of how it should be done. Good work.
And just to echo, I think that's why this OE doesn't have 2 hours of conversation, because we see this ongoing, the references you made, and that we know to board meeting upon board meeting where we're nodding because we've seen this in an evidentiary way all year long. So just, to reiterate that this is not a one and done for us too, where we're not engaging with this OE. It's because this is it's all year long. with the level of detail that you two present to us and your team.
I think this is also a good time to point out, one of the reasons we engaged in this process of policy-based governance is to make this sort of stuff more transparent, right? In fact, we've probably beaten budget items to death in the course of our board meetings over the year, like absolutely to death. But it's very transparent and it's very accountable, and you guys do a great job of managing the money so that there's a positive balance, but the transparency can't be overstated in the system itself. You know, when I first came on the board, I remember meeting randomly at 2 different times, other board members who both said they came on, they served the Verona School Board at different times and were tasked with cleaning up some sort of budgetary mess. I didn't ask too much because it's like years and years and years ago. And to be able to say that we aren't necessarily cleaning that up because there's a transparent system for how this gets presented to board members who like aren't always going to know what to ask is a pretty cool thing.
I appreciate all the work that you do to keep us moving forward in the way that we understand it. I feel like I understand the budget in a way that's really robust and ultimately helps us do our job in the way that we need to do it. But to John's point, I also want to lift up, the work that Amy Allman has done, in the past, bringing in, as board treasurer, this has been, what we're doing is we're kind of continuing on some values that have been put in place, but we really think that they're being executed in a way that I think past boards would be proud of seeing and future boards will be grateful for. So thank you.
Huzzah, can we vote like that? All in favor, say huzzah.
Robert's rules would be okay. All right, I can't say it, so I'm just gonna, if
That's okay.
you're ready to vote, all in favor of approving OE5 as presented, say aye or some other form
Positive.
of affirmation.
Aye.
Any opposed signify with nay. OE5 has been approved as presented. Thank you all.
Finance fun.
And that is the pre-snow day giddiness.
Yeah, that is what it is.
I said today in the office, like, is there anything better than like being like a 5th grader ahead of a snow day? It's the best.
I
I
even
will say,
asked.
my son did say, Dad, technically it's not a school night tonight.
It's the best.
Well, and I asked my middle schooler, did people cheer when the principal came on? Like, where was this? She's like, I don't think so. I'm like, what? How do you not
She got
react?
her own personal email.
Right? I know. And
I
nobody.
have been checking the weather for a
Mr.
week, so I
Crow is
got
on
a
the-
notification, and I was like, what is this? What is going on?
You don't have to turn your pajamas inside out. It's
I've never
already
heard
done.
that. Okay, so moving on to board action, discussion of WASB resolutions. Jen, do you want to kind of? Courtney will be our delegate at the WASB convention, and he will be tasked with voting on the resolutions, but Jen was our delegate last year, so.
And they are before.
Oh, boy.
I know, right? So in front of you, thanks to Lori, you have a nice dense stapled document that is the resolutions that are going to be proposed at this year's delegate assembly. So just so you know, first of all, logistically, if you kind of skim through, the actual resolutions is the first 9 pages. And then the pages subsequent to that are basically the submission paperwork that districts gave to WASB to justify the reason they wanted it to go to the full delegate assembly. So it's just kind of the background information, basically. I will also say upon glancing at these, because this is my first time looking at them, there are carryover resolutions from last year because the delegate assembly did not finish its job last year. So, so there are some carryovers, and that's all I'll say about that. So in terms of Corby, you are charged as our representative to vote as you see fit to vote on these resolutions. I will speak to say, I trust you fully to vote as you believe in your heart you want to vote on these. And the rest of us, if you read through these and you feel some sort of passionate way about any of them, please don't hesitate to reach out to Corby, share a vote, yes or no. If you would like Corby to speak, we wish him to speak on a resolution. But just, this is for you all to just read and peruse to know that these are the things that Corby's gonna be presented with. And if you have strong thoughts one way or the other, feel free to reach out. And if not, you know, again, Corby, thank you for being our representative to go through the process and to vote on our behalf.
Yes, no problem.
Any questions from anyone about this process, protocol, or next steps?
John, I love how you have such a poker face all the time.
This is why I'm not allowed to go to this event, especially adults, because
Let's nominate.
I read this.
Oh, I think, is the secretary?
Yes.
So I should.
Okay. Corby, I know we may talk
I'll
to,
be there.
there's one coming from Sun Prairie that we have some extra information on, so we'll make sure you have that too, Corby.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
What was that, Jen?
We were contacted by folks in Sun Prairie. As a heads up, there's one that hopefully is in here, but I'll make sure, but I'll pass along information that Sun Prairie folks shared to make sure that we had enough information about the context of the resolution.
Okay.
And Jen, come as a backup, so you might be.
You will be in Milwaukee,
Yeah, I'll be in the.
yes, but no, you are not allowed in the delegate assembly unless Corby
Unless
is
Corby's
not there.
Got it, okay.
Yep. Thank you for the
So I'll be
clarifying
around.
question. Yeah.
Can I quickly get, just a reminder, who's in Milwaukee next week?
I'm gonna go. I'll be there.
I'll be there.
Okay, Corbin. We're good? Thanks, all right. Just double, triple check. We want to make sure everybody's set.
Okay,
Thanks to those of you that are going.
yes, thank you. Look forward to hearing how your time in Milwaukee is. It's actually, it's a cool event,
There's
so.
a lot to learn, especially about budget. I really recommend it to your board members.
Okay, next we have OE8, communicating with and support for the board, updates and planning. Did you want to share something about this, or did we want to talk about this? Jen, did you want to talk about it?
Yeah, so thanks, Dr. Player. You all received an email that had a link to an example of another district that does like board meeting summaries after the fact. And this was something that we discussed as a leadership team and thinking this could be a really great thing to help continue to think of ways to share to the community more readily and easily what happens at our board meetings, other than please go rewatch the YouTube. You know, we don't have a nice way of doing a process like that. And so that was something that was suggested. I think the idea is fantastic.
I love it.
So that was an example to just use and to look at. I'll just share, as I was looking at that example, is robust and so detailed and amazing. And even if we start with something small, I think it's a step in the right direction. But I think we'll have some collaboration on, what that looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for setting it up, and thanks, board, for receiving that email today. I also, I had a great question from a board member, that what we were presenting was more the format and template. It wasn't necessarily the content.
Right.
That's why it wasn't, it was because the example distributor doesn't use, our same governance model, so it wasn't the content that we were looking at. So, but we were trying to think of as you articulated, a way to get communication of like today, great, important. I mean, the community wants to know about staffing. The community wants to know about our budget. How do we get that to our public in a very timely manner that's very sufficient? And we would like to be able to start to, if approved by a Board of Education, to turn these around within the next day or two to get them out immediately following the board member. We think the immediacy of getting the information from the night before out would really help, keep the continuity of what's going on and get it. We're just in the space and time that the longer we wait for information to get out, the kind of the quicker it falls by the wayside.
And it's something that Nicole brought up, a lot of that would be great, those summaries. I think starting out less is more. And see if we should add more, because if the public is reading it, the eyes glaze over very quickly. And also just making sure that language we use is simplified.
Correct.
Because that just goes over our heads, so.
To build on that, I think it, and we can maybe give more feedback via email. But I would also love if like on this one, they're talking about, staff compensation, or they're talking about report cards. It would also be cool to tag it back to like, if I wanna go somewhere and see the past history about report cards, so like, I was trying to read up on this neighborhood we're trying to develop in Fitchburg, and I had to go, it was nice to not have to go through each meeting to find the information, or each broad council meeting, I had to go to the committee meeting, and since we don't have committees, it might be cool in some way to tag it back to a topic, so I can go and see everything about, compensation, or everything about report cards or reading or whatever. But to Juan Carlos's point, I think that's maybe a phase 3 thing, just like a nice to have, but this looks super great. Maybe fewer words, but this looks awesome. Thanks for sharing.
And then I'm remembering that it will be something readily seen and available on the district home page.
Correct.
Yeah, so in terms of just being able for a community to be able to find this easily, it will be super helpful.
Any of those?
Wow, yeah.
No, I agree. I think it's good to start moving this direction. I think simpler is better. I like the idea of tagging. I'm kind of stumped as to how that would be simple and effective to put together.
And I feel like I use this and see if that comes up.
But yeah, no, I'm all for it. It's great.
Sounds good.
So then just another general comment, this idea of OE8, we're gonna have this in a standing, just named item under board action each week. So if there's just we keep up with our own planning and just, right, as a collective, on what we want to continue to do to just focus on our own work, our board work, our learning. You know, we have some thoughts, maybe on ways to workshop to learn more about what our roles, you know, are as board members. So just, we'll leave that there as another way to just clearly identify this kind of topic.
Do we have another workshop? Are we aiming for a workshop every quarter? Is that still
It's
the
still a goal.
Okay, cool.
And I think we talked about just in our last, time together, how there were a couple things that we wanted to circle back on.
Yeah.
And I think, I heard from a couple of board members that, maybe some implicit bias training would be of interest to the board. Implicit bias training, would be of interest to the board. So if there's things that the board is interested in, elevate those topics. We won't be able to do them all, at one shot, but we can start triaging and keeping a list. If there's, I think we have some ground level learning that we all probably need to do. And that's just, there's some good recurring learning. But then I think there's some topics that are bigger and broader that we can customize.
Just a point of clarification, because when we did discuss this at the workshop, one of the things that we discussed being potentially confusing for administration is the idea of supporting the board as a collective, but not individual board members. And so I can see a problem of having a standing agenda item, which I think is a really good idea. But the idea that, like, just because I might say at a board meeting, I think we should get this, that the expectation is not that Dr. Clarity takes that and runs with it. That's just me saying.
Right.
And a lot of it
It's only when
is.
the board speaks.
Right,
Exactly.
and some of this is about to each other, that it's
Yeah.
not at all about,
Okay.
telling or a directive toward administration. It's more for the 7 of us. What does this board want to engage in workshop topics and learning that is not an expectation that admins somehow do any extra work or providing.
Absolutely. John still has a furrowed brow. I feel like we just,
It's not gonna change for
We
the
can't
next
wait for the
24,
brow to
48 hours.
We can't.
if anyone has milk beds, throw them down his way. We'll see what happens. Are there any general board updates from anybody? No, yes?
Just want to thank Dr. Clarity for being our guest raffle ticket person, drawer,
Legal lottery.
legal lottery at our fundraising event, our being fraternity, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, our annual New Year's Eve raffle. He did an amazing job representing the district. We had another superintendent there, Rainey Briggs from Baraboo, and they did a great job. So thank you.
Absolutely. This is, people were gonna ask me to say our fraternity. I am not a member of.
I feel like you would have heard if you were, quite
I
honestly.
mean, our,
Yes,
those who are members.
yeah, because I don't want to give, I have much respect for Omega Psi Phi, and I don't want to disrespect by claiming that I am. Yeah.
Anything else from the board? Okay, with that, we had a couple, public comments that were submitted, in writing, one from Dustin Cohen, who's a parent, of a student here in the district, and it was regarding school start time. The comment is 7:30 a.m. start time is too early. This is a significant hardship for my child. Not every child magically wakes up at 6 or 6:30 a.m. We have made a significant effort to adapt our sleeping schedule to the school schedule, but we are halfway through the academic year and every day is still a struggle. I strongly urge the district to rethink the logic behind such an early start time for grade school children. If the paucity of bus drivers is really the reason, then we should be paying them more money to ensure we can run buses at a normal time. If we truly value our students' safety and health, then paying bus drivers more money is a simple solution. So that is from Dustin Cohen. And then another one was submitted by Emily O'Brien, who is another parent of a student who attends our school district regarding open enrollment. And her comment reads, our family has found a home in the Verona School District and would like to humbly request that the board votes to allow enough open enrollment spots to allow the students and their siblings currently in a Verona school to continue their education journey within the district. During COVID, when the enrollment numbers were down, we were welcomed into the district and have immersed ourselves in Verona sports, activities, community events, and charitable endeavors for several years. While we were informed we were required to re-enroll at middle school, at the time it was said that in the absence of behavioral issues, it was very unlikely a spot would not be available for my daughter and her siblings going forward. I do understand the school board must plan and prepare for growth in new households in Verona. However, I think it is noteworthy that 2013 kids now entering middle school was a historically low birth year in the area, and several of the neighborhoods Verona was accounting for have been delayed in their development due to COVID and costs. All in all, I just ask the board look at the true number of spots needed to accommodate a handful of open enrollment families that have been in the district for many years and consider the impact it will have on these young students to deny their transition from elementary to middle school. Their school taxes have also been allocated to the Verona district each year they attend. Thank you for your consideration. So good information to have as we consider open enrollment and vote next year. And I think hearing the impact on that is helpful to us. So with that, we can move on to the superintendent consent agenda. Has everyone had a chance to take a look? Any questions? Hearing none, the superintendent consent agenda has been approved as presented. We can take a look at the board's consent agenda. Any questions on that? Hearing none, we can approve the board's consent agenda as presented. Future agenda items, we can take a look at our upcoming meeting dates. Our next meeting is January 22nd, and then a week in Milwaukee after that for several board members. And then February 5th and 19th are our meetings immediately after that. And we will look to get the workshop scheduled. We are also going to be trying to accommodate a workshop on the 22nd. I think we talked about 5 o'clock, but Juan Carlos, you're out of the country on that day, is that right? Okay, so let's, okay. Let's, we can circle back on that one, but I think we still have the 22nd kind of bookmarked at 5 o'clock with Shayna coming in. So, but let's, this is for administrative contract workshop, yeah. But we can, I don't want you to want to do something out of the country. I mean,
I'm checking the flight back. Can I zoom in? I'm sure you can.
yes, but yeah, we will figure, let's talk after,
Okay.
yeah, we'll circle back. So is there any other comments or questions about upcoming agenda? Okay, hearing none, we're going to adjourn to closed session under Wisconsin statute 19.85 sub 1 sub G to confer with legal counsel for the governmental body who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved regarding student injury claim, and adjourn under Wisconsin statute 19.85 sub 1 sub F to consider financial, medical, social, or personal histories or disciplinary data of specific persons, preliminary consideration of specific personnel problems, or the investigation of charges against specific persons, except for paragraph B applies, which if discussed in public would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred in such histories or data or involved in such problems or investigations regarding personnel matter. Is there a motion to adjourn? A motion from Jen, is there a second?
Second.
Second from John. We'll start with a roll call vote, starting with Joe.
Aye.
Corby.
Aye.
Jen.
Aye.
Nicole.
Aye.
John.
Aye.
Juan Carlos. I'm aye as well. We are officially adjourned to closed session. We can take just a quick couple-minute break, 5-minute break max, and then we can get moving.
Please be here at 7:30.